Look, I'm going to level with you. The Galactic Council had protocols for first contact scenarios. They didn't have protocols for what happens when an 8-year-old human befriends a stranded alien and triggers an interstellar custody battle. Turns out humanity's protective instincts don't scale down. They scale up. And suddenly we're adopting entire civilizations because one kid made a friend. You know how every species gets a warning label when they join the galactic community? The Council's official assessment framed humans as unpredictable risk-takers with fierce loyalty to their pack. Their analysts spent months observing military exercises, economic patterns, and social structures, compiling a comprehensive threat profile that missed the single most important variable. They categorized us as dangerous but principled, noting our tendency toward extreme measures when protecting what we consider ours. What they failed to grasp was how broadly we define ours. The Council expected calculated diplomacy based on mutual interest. They prepared for trade negotiations, territorial disputes, and military posturing, standard first contact scenarios they'd managed for centuries. Their risk assessments focused entirely on conquest scenarios and resource conflicts, mapping out potential flashpoints and containment strategies. They had contingency plans for human expansionism, technological competition, even cultural contamination. They didn't have a single protocol for interspecies adoption. This fundamental misunderstanding created the perfect conditions for what happened next. The gap between their clinical predictions and human reality wasn't just academic. It was about to become spectacularly apparent in ways their models couldn't possibly account for. Their analysts viewed protection of the vulnerable as a secondary characteristic rather than our primary motivation engine. They saw the loyalty but not its scaling properties. The warning completely missed that humanity's unpredictability stems from protecting our young, and that this instinct doesn't diminish with distance. It expands to fill available space. When a human child forms a bond, the entire species effectively signs on as unofficial guardians. The Council's psychologists had observed this behavior in small-scale scenarios, but failed to extrapolate it to interstellar relations. They treated it as a quaint cultural footnote rather than a fundamental operating principle, which brings us to how one child's afternoon adventure would prove them all wrong. Their carefully constructed risk matrices, their probability calculations, their diplomatic playbooks, all about to be rendered obsolete by an 8-year-old's capacity for friendship and humanity's refusal to let that friendship remain small. The Council had prepared for warriors and diplomats. They weren't ready for parents. Here's the thing about human children: they don't recognize diplomatic boundaries. Convention means nothing to them. Protocols are just adult noise, and interspecies regulations might as well be rules about cleaning their rooms. While the Galactic Council drafted committees to discuss proper first contact procedures, 8-year-old Timothy Chen simply walked right up to a crashed escape pod during what was supposed to be a routine planetary survey mission with his parents. He didn't alert authorities, didn't consult the Galactic Contact Handbook, didn't even hesitate. The pod door was jammed half open, smoke still curling from the edges, and inside was a Zephyran survivor who should have been terrifying by any measure. Segmented limbs, compound eyes, chitinous plating cracked from the impact. Most species would have registered threat, danger, the unknown. Timothy registered someone who needed help. Their communication began without language, without protocol, without any of the formal structures the Council required. Gestures first. Timothy offering his water bottle, the Zephyran clicking its mandibles in what turned out to be gratitude. Shared food came next. Human nutrition bars exchanged for what appeared to be crystallized nectar from the alien's emergency kit. They bypassed 17 separate Galactic Council protocols in the first hour alone, violating rules about biological exchange, unauthorized interaction, and cross-species communication. While human and Zephyran diplomats were still exchanging formal introductions light years away, a child and an alien were sitting in the dirt sharing snacks and learning each other's names through pointing and repetition. Timothy became Timothy in the Zephyran's clicking speech pattern, while the alien earned the nickname Clicky for the sound its limbs made when moving. The bond formed in those first hours wasn't political, wasn't strategic, wasn't even intelligent by galactic standards. It was personal in the way only children can make things personal: immediate, uncomplicated, and absolute. This innocent friendship immediately became the foundation for everything that followed. creating a personal connection before the bureaucratic ones could even begin negotiations. The Council's entire first contact framework assumed formal introductions between recognized authorities, not snack sharing between species. Their models accounted for cultural misunderstandings, translation errors, even deliberate deception. They didn't account for the simple, unforced affinity that can happen when two beings meet without preconceptions. An 8-year-old's friendship with an alien survivor changed interstellar politics by establishing trust at the individual level before institutions could complicate it with agendas and caution. The relationship began with help offered and accepted, not with demands or negotiations. That foundation of mutual aid and curiosity proved more durable than any treaty could have been, because it was built on something real before anyone could make it symbolic. But here's the thing about human protective instincts. They don't stay small for long. What begins with one child offering a water bottle to a stranger doesn't end there. The adults were about to discover what their children already understood instinctively, and they were going to apply that understanding with all the resources of a spacefaring civilization. You know how most species would consult a rulebook? Humans consult their gut. This particular gut check happened to Captain Elena Vasquez, whose diplomatic cruiser was escorting envoys when her sensors picked up something that should have been impossible. 6 unidentified raider ships closing in on the exact coordinates where Timothy and his new Zaffiran friend were still located. The raiders weren't even trying to hide their approach, broadcasting open challenges about testing human claims of protection. They specifically targeted both children, their communications laced with that particular brand of interstellar arrogance that assumes technological superiority, translates to moral authority. They mocked the human concept of protecting the weak as sentimental nonsense, the kind of evolutionary baggage that supposedly kept primitive species from advancing. Their leader actually used the phrase natural selection while describing what they planned to do to the children, as if cruelty was some kind of cosmic principle rather than a choice. Vasquez faced a decision that would have paralyzed most commanders from more protocol-driven species. Maintain diplomatic distance as her mission parameters required, or intervene against 6-to-1 odds with a ship not designed for combat. She didn't request instructions from Earth Command, didn't consult the regulations, didn't even check with her tactical officer. She opened a channel to the raiders and delivered one sentence that became legendary across 7 systems. "You have threatened a human child and their friend. This is your only warning." Then she did something that should have ended her career. She ordered emergency power redistribution, cutting life support to minimum levels and redirecting everything to weapons and shields. Her engineering officer protested. Protocol required maintaining life support even during combat operations. Vasquez overrode him, turning a diplomatic vessel with limited defensive capabilities into an improvised warship facing overwhelming force. The engagement was brutal and immediate. Her ship wasn't built for this. No redundant systems, no reinforced hull plating, no specialized targeting computers. She used the cruiser's larger mass to her advantage, positioning between the raiders and the planet while her weapons officers fired at maximum rate. The raiders, expecting either retreat or negotiation, found themselves facing a ship fighting with what appeared to be complete disregard for its own survival. She engaged all 6 simultaneously, using evasive patterns designed for smaller, more agile craft. The cruiser took heavy damage within minutes, shield generators failing, hull breaches on 3 decks, multiple systems flashing critical alerts. Her crew fought with that particular human intensity that emerges when children are threatened, operating with efficiency that bypassed standard procedures and went straight to instinct. Captain Vasquez sacrificed her ship's life support because protecting children triggers humanity's pack mentality override on all safety protocols. Standard military doctrine emphasizes asset preservation and tactical withdrawal when outnumbered. Human doctrine, when children are involved, emphasizes making the other side regret their life choices regardless of cost. The calculus shifts from survival probability to protection certainty, and the results tend to be spectacularly destructive for whoever triggered the response. Then again, she was just following human nature to its logical conclusion. What began with a child offering water to a stranger became a starship captain, willing to suffocate in the void rather than let harm come to that child. The distance between the gesture and the response might seem enormous to other species, but to humans it's a straight line. You protect the vulnerable, and you don't stop because the threat gets bigger. You just scale up your response until the threat ceases to exist. The thing about Zapirans, they don't send thank you notes. When news of the rescue reached them through official diplomatic channels, their response completely bypassed all formal communication protocols, including the emergency priority bands reserved for first contact scenarios. They didn't transmit to governments or military command structures, or even recognize diplomatic representatives. Their species communicates profound gratitude through harmonic songs engineered to propagate through subspace, using standing wave patterns that resonate across light years without signal degradation. They broadcast directly to every member of their species across multiple star systems simultaneously, creating a shared experience that transcended political boundaries or hierarchical structures. The song contained the entire narrative of Timothy discovering the crashed pod, his initial cautious approach, the sharing of resources, Captain Vasquez's intervention, and the subsequent protection offered. It wasn't just reporting events, it wove the story into complex harmonic progressions that conveyed emotional context human language couldn't capture. This musical transmission carried emotional resonance that diplomatic messages could never achieve, largely because Zapiran communication operates on multiple frequencies simultaneously. The baseline melody carried factual information, while harmonic overtones conveyed emotional states and subharmonics provided contextual framing. Human analysts needed 3 separate translation systems working in parallel just to decode the full meaning, discovering layers of gratitude, relief, and something approximating familial bonding that no official communique could express. It spread like wildfire through civilizations that hadn't even established formal contact with Earth yet. Because subspace harmonics don't respect political borders or communication embargoes, the song reached trading outposts, research stations, and even isolated colonies that were technically outside recognized space. Within hours, species that had never encountered humans were hearing about Timothy's friendship and humanity's protective response through art rather than official bulletins, creating perceptions based on emotional narrative rather than political positioning. The galaxy heard about humanity's actions through cultural expression rather than diplomatic statement, which meant the information bypassed standard skepticism filters. When governments make claims about their actions, other species automatically applied discount factors for propaganda and strategic messaging. When an entire civilization sings about being protected, the authenticity comes through in the harmonic structures themselves.
Zapiran songs can't effectively
Conceal deception because emotional truth resonates in the physics of the transmission. The Zapirans broadcast their gratitude in song because their culture expresses deep bonds through harmonic communications that fundamentally transcend language barriers. Their musical language operates on mathematical principles that convey meaning through interval relationships and resonance patterns, rather than vocabulary or syntax. A human might say, "We are grateful for your protection," but a Zapiran song can express precisely how that gratitude feels, how it changes their perception of the relationship, and what obligations they perceive as resulting from the intervention. Which brings us back to how a melody can rewrite interstellar politics without a single formal negotiation or treaty discussion. The song didn't just communicate facts, it created shared emotional context across multiple civilizations, establishing humanity's protective actions as genuine rather than strategic. It framed the relationship as one of mutual care rather than transactional alliance, setting expectations that would shape diplomatic interactions for decades to come. Other species heard the song and understood something fundamental had changed in how civilizations might relate to each other. Look, most species have alliance treaties. Humans have adoption papers. The Zapiran song triggered a formal reassessment at the Galactic Council because their harmonic broadcast essentially served as formal notification that a protection relationship had been established under interstellar law. While humanity was still figuring out translation protocols, the legal machinery was already grinding toward conclusions nobody had anticipated. Ambassador Chen discovered something fascinating in the fine print of galactic legislation. Under established precedent, protecting a significantly weaker species creates automatic guardianship status if the protection is offered without expectation of compensation, and the protected species accepts the assistance. This wasn't some obscure clause either. It was right there in the foundational interstellar accord that every spacefaring civilization signs. Article 14, Section 3, commonly called the Guardian Protocol. The law had been written centuries earlier to prevent exploitation scenarios, but it worked equally well for adoption scenarios. This wasn't a treaty option or negotiated arrangement. It was a legal consequence that activated automatically once certain conditions were met. The Council's legal teams realized humanity had essentially adopted the entire Zapiran species through Captain Vasquez's actions, reinforced by Earth's subsequent military deployment and resource allocation. The law interpreted protection as voluntary assumption of responsibility, and humanity had assumed quite a lot of responsibility very publicly. The status conferred both rights and responsibilities that typical alliances didn't include. Earth gained legal standing to represent Zapiran interests in galactic forums, access to their trade networks, and priority claim on joint development opportunities. The Zapirans received guaranteed protection, technological support, and representation by a species with considerably more political influence. Both sides gained something, but the relationship was framed as guardianship rather than partnership, which changed how other civilizations perceived the arrangement. Earth suddenly found itself with elevated status and access to alliance networks it hadn't formally negotiated for. While the Zapirans received protection and support without the usual concessions weaker species had to make, the bureaucratic machinery at the Galactic Council struggled to process a relationship based on emotional bonds and legal technicalities rather than carefully negotiated terms. Their systems were designed for quid pro quo arrangements, not what essentially amounted to interstellar foster care. Rescuing one alien automatically makes you guardian of their species because galactic law interprets protection as voluntary, assumption of responsibility across the entire civilization. The law assumes that if you're willing to protect one member against significant threat, you're implicitly committing to protect the whole species from similar threats. It's a logical extension principle that most civilizations never trigger because they don't operate on human protective instincts. The Council's legal department spent weeks trying to find loopholes or justification to reverse the automatic status. But the precedent was clear, and the conditions had been met definitively. Humanity's actions were public, unmistakable, and completely consistent with assuming responsibility for Zapiran safety. Their only option was to acknowledge the relationship and work within the established legal framework. But here's the thing about assuming responsibility. Eventually, someone tests your commitment. The legal status might be clear on paper, but interstellar politics operates on practical demonstrations rather than theoretical positions. Other civilizations would want to see what guardianship actually meant when challenged, and they wouldn't wait long to find out. You know how bullies test new kids on the playground? Same concept with starships. The Altarian Empire viewed Earth's sudden guardianship status as a potential power grab, rather than genuine protection, seeing an opportunity to challenge the new arrangement before it could solidify. Their ambassador made a formal challenge during a council session, questioning whether humanity possessed the actual capability to back its newfound responsibilities across interstellar distances. He framed it as a concern for galactic stability, suggesting that offering protection without sufficient force projection endangered everyone involved. Ambassador Reynolds responded in a way that became standard for human diplomatic practice. She bypassed verbal arguments entirely and activated a tactical display visible to every delegation. The holographic projection showed 3 full fleets already positioned in Zapiran space, their patrol routes establishing permanent coverage patterns around key systems. Construction progress indicators highlighted garrison bases being built on 6 different moons, with completion timelines showing most would be operational within standard weeks. The display included joint technology development programs that would normally take years to negotiate, showing weapon system integrations and shared defense networks already in advanced testing phases. Her statement during the presentation became the new galactic standard for protection doctrine. Any attack on Zapiran civilians is an act of war against humanity itself. The wording was deliberately absolute, leaving no room for interpretation or conditional response. She didn't threaten escalation or promise retaliation. She stated it as established fact, the way someone might describe orbital mechanics or light speed limitations. The certainty in her delivery carried more weight than any list of consequences could have. The Altarians hadn't expected Earth to move from 0 to full military commitment in weeks. Their intelligence assessments assumed humanity would need standard diplomatic timelines to establish presence, build infrastructure, and develop cooperative frameworks. Instead, they found fully operational fleets, construction projects at advanced stages, and integrated command structures that suggested planning that predated the official guardianship declaration. The speed of deployment indicated either prescient preparation or resource allocation capabilities that violated standard military logistics models. Earth showed the Altarian Empire 3 fleets, permanent patrols and garrison bases to demonstrate proportional response capability, backing their guardianship claim. The display wasn't about boasting military power, it was about showing established presence and commitment. The garrison bases included medical facilities, civilian protection systems, and infrastructure support that demonstrated comprehensive care rather than mere territorial control. The patrol routes covered trade lanes, residential zones, and resource extraction sites, showing protection extended to economic and social functions beyond mere military defense. The Altarian delegation's reaction became a case study in diplomatic recalibration. Their ambassador shifted from challenging humanity's capability to inquiring about participation in joint defense initiatives within standard weeks. The Empire's military commands quietly updated their threat assessments to account for human response times and commitment levels, particularly noting the integration of defensive systems that suggested deeper technological cooperation than initially apparent. Their intelligence services began reevaluating all previous assumptions about human resource allocation and strategic planning capabilities. Then again, showing your cards sometimes prevents having to play them. The demonstration achieved what months of negotiation might not have. It established credibility through evidence rather than promises. Other civilizations observing the exchange noted the efficiency of proving capability rather than debating it, with several beginning to adopt similar demonstration-based approaches to diplomatic challenges. The Galactic Council's procedural guidelines were quietly updated to include provisions for evidence-based response to challenges, formalizing what humanity had accomplished through straightforward presentation of established facts. The thing about adoption, you get surprised by your new family's talents. As humans and Zapparans integrated beyond the formal guardianship arrangement, their technologies began merging in ways nobody could have predicted. This wasn't the standard technology transfer scenario, where an advanced civilization shares knowledge with a developing one. Both species brought completely different technological trees to the relationship, and when those trees started cross-pollinating, the results rewrote several branches of physics. Zappiran crystal singing wasn't just cultural expression. It manipulated fundamental physics in ways human science couldn't explain using existing models. Their harmonic mathematics, developed over millennia of sonic communication, solved subspace communication problems that had plagued human physicists for decades. The equations describing how specific crystal resonances interacted with subspace dimensions were elegant in ways that made human brute force computing approaches look primitive by comparison. Their understanding of standing wave propagation through multiple dimensions allowed for signal transmission without the massive energy requirements of human systems. Crystal-based networks revolutionized subspace communications almost overnight, making previous electronic technology obsolete across multiple sectors. The new systems used precisely tuned crystalline structures that could maintain stable harmonic resonances across light years, with minimal signal degradation. Human communication arrays that required football field-sized antenna complexes and massive power plants were replaced by devices the size of jewelry boxes that performed better, with a fraction of the energy input. The efficiency gains were so dramatic that commercial shipping lanes retrofitted with the technology saw profitability increases that transformed entire economic models. Joint research teams produced breakthroughs in physics that neither species could have achieved alone. Human experimental methodology combined with Zapparan harmonic theory created entirely new research paradigms. They discovered resonance patterns that could stabilize wormhole endpoints, harmonic frequencies that affected gravitational constants in localized areas, and crystal structures that could store information in quantum states previously thought impossible to maintain. The collaboration moved so fast that academic journals couldn't keep up with the peer review process, forcing the creation of entirely new publication systems. Human educational institutions and performance venues underwent significant adaptations to accommodate Zapiran physiology and artistry. Concert halls were redesigned with resonant chambers that could accommodate frequencies outside human hearing ranges. University curricula expanded to include harmonic mathematics and crystal engineering, alongside traditional physics and engineering courses. The technological exchange became genuinely bidirectional, rather than one species uplifting another, with each civilization contributing equally to the shared knowledge base while maintaining their distinct technological identities. Zapiran crystal singing technology revolutionized human communications by using harmonic resonance to manipulate subspace physics more efficiently than electronic systems ever could. The breakthrough wasn't just incremental improvement. It was paradigm-shifting advancement that changed how multiple civilizations understood and utilized subspace dimensions. The technology spread through human space with astonishing speed, because the practical benefits were immediately apparent to anyone who saw the demonstration models in operation. Which brings us back to how cultural exchange becomes technological advancement when you stop seeing other species as separate civilizations and start treating them as family. The deepest breakthroughs came not from formal technology transfer programs, but from casual collaborations between researchers who had become friends outside their professional roles. The most important equations were often worked out during shared meals or recreational activities, rather than in laboratory settings, because the trust required for true innovation had already been established through personal relationships. Here's the thing about claiming protection. Eventually, someone calls your bluff. The Ravager Syndicate decided to test Earth's commitment by targeting gentle rain on Stones, a small Zapiran moon with minimal defensive capabilities and no strategic value beyond its civilian population. They sent 16 raider ships, enough to overwhelm local security but not enough to trigger major military response under standard engagement protocols. This was a calculated probe designed to measure exactly how far human protection extended and what price they were willing to pay for it. The Righteous Fury responded with the declaration that became standard doctrine across human protectorates. Their transmission was blunt and unambiguous. We have claimed these people as our own. No negotiation, no warnings, no attempt at de-escalation. The human commander didn't request the raiders stand down or offer them withdrawal terms. The statement was purely informational. These were protected civilians and attacking them carried specific consequences. The engagement itself was decisive and brutally efficient. 14 raiders destroyed within minutes of the declaration, their ships torn apart by precision strikes that left no doubt about the outcome. 2 ships captured intact with crews taken prisoner for interrogation and eventual trial. The human forces suffered no casualties, demonstrating both tactical superiority and complete defensive control of the engagement space. The message was clear and intentional. Protecting civilians included punitive action against anyone threatening them. This wasn't defensive maneuvering or territory protection. It was a demonstration of consequences specifically designed to make targeting Zapirans unprofitable for criminal organizations. The Ravagers had expected limited engagement rules where they could test boundaries and withdraw if opposition became too strong. Instead, they found absolute response that eliminated their force while gathering intelligence on their operations. The Syndicate lost not just ships and crew but operational, security, and tactical information. The response shocked criminal networks that had operated for generations under established rules of limited engagement. Most civilizations defended their territories but didn't pursue total destruction of raiding forces. Human doctrine when protecting civilians proved fundamentally different. They didn't just drive off threats, they eliminated them as functional entities. The calculus for targeting human-protected assets shifted from risk-reward analysis to near certainty of catastrophic loss. When 16 raiders tested Earth's commitment, they discovered protection included decisive punitive action that made targeting Zapirans professionally suicidal. The Syndicate's leadership actually issued new guidelines advising members to avoid human-protected space entirely after analyzing the engagement data. Their assessment concluded that the potential rewards didn't justify the near certainty of total asset loss and intelligence compromise. Other criminal organizations followed suit, creating de facto safe zones around human protectorates that diplomatic agreements couldn't have established. But here's the thing about protection. It only works if the protected want it. The Ravager test proved human capability and willingness to defend Zapparan interests, but it didn't address whether the Zapparans themselves wanted this level of protection or the consequences that came with it. Military success creates security but doesn't automatically create consent, and the relationship was about to face its most complex challenge yet, not from external threats, but from within the protected population itself. You know how one popular kid gets friends? Suddenly everyone wants in. After the Ravager incident, 17 civilizations requested alliance partnerships with humanity that didn't fit any existing diplomatic categories. They weren't seeking trade agreements or mutual defense pacts or resource-sharing treaties. These were requests for adoption-style guardianship that mirrored the Zapparan model, complete with the emotional commitment and comprehensive protection that came with it. This created a diplomatic crisis at Earth's foreign ministry, because nobody had designed systems for processing requests for relationships based on familial bonding rather than negotiated terms. The standard treaty frameworks assumed reciprocal benefits and clearly defined obligations. These requests came with offers of complete technological sharing, open borders, and cultural integration in exchange for the kind of protective commitment humanity had shown the Zapparans. The civilizations making these requests ranged from recently contacted species to established spacefaring cultures that had maintained independence for centuries. Humanity responded by sharing resources freely rather than negotiating exchanges, funding joint development projects without demanding controlling interest, and creating networked ecosystems where all participants benefited regardless of their contribution levels. Other species observed that humans treated Zapparans as kin rather than clients or allies, noticing the absence of conditional relationships or performance requirements. The protection came with support rather than strings, creating trust levels that transactional alliances could never achieve. Dr. Yamoto's analysis identified this as pack loyalty protocols, replacing standard diplomatic conventions, noting that human behavior shifted when they perceived other species as part of their extended social group. The usual calculations of cost versus benefit gave way to resource sharing based on need rather than equity. Decision-making incorporated emotional factors that traditional diplomacy deliberately excluded, creating outcomes that were suboptimal by conventional metrics but created stronger long-term bonds. The galaxy started testing a new logic of belonging based on emotional bonds rather than negotiated terms. With multiple civilizations experimenting with relationship models that prioritized trust over verification, the 17 requests represented a fundamental shift in how species viewed interstellar relations, moving from careful alliance building to seeking genuine partnership based on demonstrated human behavior rather than promised benefits. They'd seen the Zapparan relationship evolve from rescue to integration to mutual advancement, and they wanted similar connections. 17 civilizations requested alliances because they observed that human guardianship offered genuine partnership rather than transactional relationships. They saw the technological exchange moving in both directions, the cultural integration happening organically, and the protective commitment remaining constant regardless of changing circumstances. The model proved attractive to species tired of alliance networks that demanded constant renegotiation and conditional support based on shifting political considerations. Then again, not everyone within the adoption was comfortable with the arrangement. The rapid expansion of human influence through emotional bonding rather than conquest created its own set of concerns, both within the adopted civilizations and among observers. Watching the new relationship model develop, some species questioned whether such deep integration could maintain cultural identity, while others worried about the concentration of influence through non-traditional means. Even among humans, debates emerged about how many adoption relationships could be sustained without diluting the commitment that made them valuable in the first place. Look, even happy families have arguments about independence. A Zapparan faction began questioning whether human protection came at the cost of their autonomy, creating the kind of internal debate that every healthy relationship eventually faces. Their harmonic conversations across subspace revealed a civilization quietly negotiating its future with Earth's presence as a constant factor in every calculation. The discussion wasn't about rejecting protection, but about understanding its long-term implications for their Cultural and political sovereignty. Some argued that closer protection constrained their ability to make independent decisions, noting how human resources and infrastructure were becoming deeply embedded in their society. They pointed to joint defense systems that required human technical support, economic patterns shifting toward human markets, and cultural exchanges that some felt created dependency rather than partnership. Their concerns centered on whether they were trading immediate security for long-term autonomy, a calculation every protected species eventually makes when the initial emergency fades. Others pointed to the technological and cultural benefits of the partnership, highlighting how crystal singing technology had advanced faster with human research methods, how their artistic traditions had gained interstellar audiences through human networks, and how their safety had allowed creative and scientific pursuits that would have been impossible under constant threat. They framed the relationship as synergistic rather than hierarchical, with both species gaining capabilities they couldn't develop independently. The debate played out through artistic expressions and scientific collaborations, rather than political protests or formal negotiations. Zapiran composers created harmonic works exploring themes of independence and connection, their melodies containing mathematical arguments about the balance between security and self-determination. Research teams jointly studied the question through sociological models and historical parallels, treating the autonomy concern as an academic problem to solve rather than a political dispute to win. President Chen's response became the model for human diplomacy in these situations. Her statement was simple and direct. The choice is yours. Earth maintained all protective measures while explicitly respecting Zapiran agency to determine the relationship's future direction and depth. Human resources remained available but not imposed. Support continued but wasn't mandatory. And the guardianship framework operated with explicit recognition that the protected species retained ultimate authority over their own destiny. Earth's approach demonstrated that true protection includes the freedom to choose its limits. Military patrols continued their routes but followed Zapiran guidance about presence levels. Economic support remained available, but required invitation rather than assumption. Technology sharing operated on request rather than imposition. The message was consistent. Protection doesn't require control, and security shouldn't mean surrender of self-determination. A Zapiran faction debated autonomy concerns because closer protection created dependency fears that required explicit agency preservation. The discussion wasn't a rejection of the relationship, but an essential part of making it sustainable long-term. Every species that accepts protection eventually questions the terms of that protection, and working through those questions openly strengthens rather than weakens the bond. Which brings us back to how true partnership requires voluntary commitment from both sides. The autonomy debate wasn't a problem to solve, but a process to navigate, and how both species handled it would determine whether the relationship matured into something lasting or remained a temporary arrangement based on circumstance. The fact that the discussion happened through art and science rather than conflict suggested both sides understood this fundamental truth about interstellar relationships. The thing about harmonic conversations, the truth resonates. After months of internal debate conducted through their unique communication methods, the Zapirans reached complete consensus without a single formal vote or political process. Their society didn't operate on majority rule or hierarchical decisions. They arrived at understanding through shared harmonic patterns that conveyed complex ideas and emotional states simultaneously. The question wasn't whether to accept or reject human protection, but how to define a relationship that preserved their identity while embracing the benefits of partnership. Their response to Earth's offer of continued partnership or complete independence arrived not through diplomatic channels, but as a focused harmonic transmission directed specifically at humanity. Unlike their previous galaxy-wide broadcast, this communication used tightly controlled resonance patterns that only human receivers could properly decode. The message carried the weight of their entire civilization's considered position, distilled into musical mathematics that conveyed both intellectual conclusion and emotional commitment. The Song of Chosen Family expressed mutual commitment to remain together as long as that arrangement served both species' best interests. It contained explicit mathematical proofs showing the benefits of continued partnership outweighing the constraints, with harmonic progressions demonstrating the exponential advantages of shared technological development and cultural exchange. The composition included counterpoint melodies addressing potential future challenges and resolutions, creating a comprehensive vision of how the relationship could evolve over centuries. The emotional resonance carried more conviction than any diplomatic agreement could achieve because Zapiran harmonic communication inherently conveys truth. Their music can't effectively carry deception. The mathematics of resonance patterns would reveal inconsistencies immediately, and emotional states translate directly into acoustic properties. Humanity received the message not as a treaty to be negotiated, but as an invitation to continue building something neither species could create alone. The song specifically acknowledged Earth's respect for their autonomy during the debate period, with musical phrases expressing appreciation for the space given to reach their own conclusions. It included harmonic sequences that mapped to human musical traditions, creating bridges between their cultural expressions that demonstrated genuine understanding rather than mere translation. The composition lasted precisely 17 minutes, a number significant in both human and Zapiran mathematics, with each section carefully structured to convey specific aspects of their decision. Humanity's reception of the song became its own significant event. Special listening chambers were constructed with crystal resonance technology that allowed humans to experience the full depth of the transmission, with harmonic interpreters providing real-time translation of the mathematical and emotional content. The experience proved profoundly moving for those who heard it, creating understanding that went far beyond what verbal communication could achieve. The Song of Chosen Family signaled mutual commitment, because harmonic communication conveys emotional truth that verbal agreements cannot approximate. The Zapirans didn't just say they wanted to continue the relationship. They demonstrated it through art that proved their understanding of both the benefits and responsibilities involved. The transmission included specific harmonic signatures that became the official authentication mark for all future joint initiatives, creating a permanent musical signature for the partnership. But here's the thing about building together. Sometimes the universe tests your construction. The harmony achieved through art and understanding would soon face challenges that required more than beautiful music to overcome. The relationship had been affirmed through culture, but its durability would soon be measured against threats that didn't care about mathematical elegance or emotional resonance. You know how every relationship faces that one ultimate test? The Omega destroyer fleet materialized without precursor signals or tactical warnings, a force that defied standard classification because it wasn't technically belligerent. There, technology didn't seek conquest, didn't want resources, didn't operate on any recognizable strategic framework. Their entire operational profile focused on systematic planetary sterilization, removing biological presence without engaging in combat or communication. They weren't invaders. They were exterminators operating on principles nobody could decipher. Humanity faced the kind of decision that breaks civilizations. The strategic calculation was brutally clear. Evacuate who they could from Zapir in space and accept catastrophic losses, or stand against a force that had wiped out 14 previous civilizations without suffering measurable damage. Every conventional military assessment recommended withdrawal and damage control. Standard doctrine called for preserving military assets to fight another day, rather than committing to certain destruction. The decision emerged unanimous across Earth's command structures without debate or dissent. They would fight. This wasn't about tactical advantage or strategic positioning. It was about the fundamental human creed that friendship is worth sacrificing for, regardless of odds or outcomes. The choice reflected a value system that placed protective bonds above survival calculations, a cultural imperative that overrode all military logic. Engagement planning ignored acceptable loss parameters and resource conservation principles that normally governed military operations. Commanders didn't calculate survival probabilities or mission success metrics. They focused entirely on how to inflict maximum damage on the Omega fleet while protecting Zapiran population centers, treating their own survival as irrelevant to the equation. Standard rules of engagement were replaced by a single directive: protect the protected. Every available ship mobilized toward what everyone understood meant certain destruction. Merchant vessels were armed with improvised weapons. Research ships were converted to missile platforms, and civilian transports became evacuation escorts. The mobilization ignored class designations and operational specializations. If it could move through space, it was heading toward the Omega fleet. The response scale shocked observers who expected measured military deployment rather than total commitment. Humanity chose to fight the Omega destroyer fleet because their guardianship creed valued friendship, protection over strategic survival calculations. The decision wasn't emotional in the sense of being irrational. It was emotional in the sense of being based on different value priorities than other civilizations employed. Where most species would calculate cost-benefit ratios, humans measured moral obligations. Where others saw assets to preserve, humans saw relationships to honor. The fleet moved into position knowing the probability of return approached zero across all vessel classes. Crews made their peace with the understanding that they were buying time for evacuation efforts rather than achieving victory. The battle plan focused on creating barriers and distractions rather than defeating the enemy, accepting that success would be measured in lives saved rather than enemies destroyed. Every tactical decision prioritized Zapiran survival over human survival. Then again, sometimes standing together means falling together. The commitment wasn't just military. Civilian networks mobilized rescue operations. Medical facilities prepared for catastrophic casualties, and entire human colonies reallocated resources to support the effort. The response demonstrated that human protection wasn't conditional on survival probability or strategic advantage. It was absolute, regardless of cost, because the relationship had become part of their identity rather than a calculated alliance. Look, I'm going to level with you about the cost of protection. The Battle of the Harmony Cluster lasted 6 days of brutal engagement against technology, so advanced it violated established physics. Human ships attempted to use Zapiran harmonic technology to disrupt Omega communications, jury-rigging crystal resonators to warship systems never designed for such applications. The improvisation worked in theory but exacted enormous practical costs as systems overloaded and crews struggled to maintain resonance patterns under combat conditions. Losses mounted hourly as destroyers fell to planetary sterilization, beams that ignored shields and armor alike. The Omega weapons didn't destroy ships so much as erase them from existence, turning advanced warships into memory and debris within seconds of contact. Evacuation protocols proved largely useless against weapons that affected entire regions of space simultaneously. Rescue operations became exercises in recovering whatever fragments remained rather than saving whole vessels or crews. The breakthrough came when human pilots started flying specific resonance patterns that Zapiran operators could detect and amplify from planetary surfaces. This unexpected tactical fusion transformed cultural exchange into military advantage, using the harmonic connection established through years of artistic collaboration as a weapon system. The patterns weren't designed for combat. They were based on Zapiran, musical traditions and mathematical progressions that human pilots learned to replicate with their ship's movements. This coordination allowed precise targeting of Omega communication nodes that had previously been invisible to human sensors. The Zapirans, operating from secure locations, used their innate understanding of harmonic physics to guide human ships toward vulnerabilities in the Omega network. The partnership moved from defense to active disruption, turning the Omega's own communication methods against them. Through resonant feedback patterns, the victory was hard-fought and came with casualty rates that would have been unacceptable in any other military context. Entire fleets were effectively destroyed to protect civilizations that weren't even human, with casualty counts reaching percentages that would constitute catastrophic loss for most species. The aftermath revealed the depth of sacrifice humanity was willing to make for their adopted species, demonstrating that their protective commitment wasn't conditional on survival, probability, or strategic advantage. The 6-day battle cost enormous losses because human Zapiran tactical fusion required time to develop against completely unfamiliar technology. The coordination between species had been established through cultural exchange rather than military training, meaning they had to invent their combat coordination methods in real time under extreme pressure. The learning curve was steep and paid for in ships and lives. but it created a tactical approach that no other civilization could replicate. Which brings us back to how we memorialize sacrifice. The battle didn't end with triumphant parades or victory celebrations. It ended with quiet accounting of losses and the beginning of a cultural process to honor what had been given. The human-Zapiran relationship had been tested at the highest possible cost, and how both species handled that accounting would define their future more than the battle itself. The thing about human memorials, they're not just about remembering. The crystal garden they built used Zapiran songs, creating standing wave patterns in human resonance chambers, forming an audio-visual testimony to the alliance that went beyond traditional monuments. This living fusion of cultures and technologies evolved continuously, as both species contributed new harmonies and resonances, making it an artwork that never settled into static form. It became a pilgrimage site for multiple civilizations seeking to understand the human-Zapiran bond firsthand. Visitors didn't just observe the memorial, they experienced it through full-spectrum harmonic immersion that conveyed the relationship's depth in ways words couldn't capture. The garden's design allowed participants to add their own resonances, creating an ever-expanding tapestry of interstellar remembrance that grew more complex with each visitor's contribution. The harmonic patterns actually improved subspace communications in surrounding sectors, creating unexpected practical benefits from what began as symbolic art. The standing waves generated clean carrier frequencies that reduced signal degradation across 12 neighboring systems, making the memorial both functional infrastructure and cultural landmark. Communication networks began routing traffic through the garden's resonance field, gaining efficiency from the precise harmonic stabilization. This living memorial served functional purposes while honoring those who fell, protecting the relationship it represented. The practical benefits became part of the remembrance. Each improved communication, each stabilized signal, served as ongoing tribute to the sacrifice that made the technology possible. The garden stood as proof that loyalty and friendship could reshape spacefaring civilization through both cultural and technological advancement. The Crystal Garden Memorial became a living fusion because Zapiran songs interacting with human technology created evolving harmonic patterns that served practical purposes beyond their symbolic meaning. The collaboration produced something neither species could have created alone, a functional artwork that advanced physics while preserving memory. The resonance chambers used quantum-entangled crystals that maintained coherence across light years, allowing the memorial's influence to extend far beyond its physical location. Visitation protocols developed organically as species discovered the garden's unique properties. Some came for spiritual reflection, others for scientific study, many for both. The experience varied depending on a visitor's biological composition and cultural background. Different species perceived the harmonies through their unique sensory capabilities, creating personalized experiences from the same underlying patterns. The memorial's designers intentionally avoided fixed interpretations or guided narratives. They created frameworks for experience rather than prescribed meanings, allowing each visitor to find their own understanding of the sacrifice and relationship it represented. This approach respected the complexity of what had been endured and achieved, acknowledging that no single perspective could capture the full significance. But here's the thing about evolution. It continues beyond the memorial. The garden became a living laboratory for harmonic physics, with researchers from multiple species studying its properties and developing new applications. The technology that began as tribute became the foundation for advancements in communication, transportation, and energy systems across allied civilizations. The memorial's success demonstrated that cultural expression and technological progress could develop symbiotically rather than competitively. You know how after-action reports usually focus on losses? Ambassador Reynolds's post-war assessment did something different. It measured gains in terms that went far beyond military outcomes. Her analysis framed the entire conflict as a profound long-term success, not because of territory taken or enemies defeated, but because of what the partnership had created under pressure. The report documented how genuine collaboration had yielded transformative technology, cultural exchange, and diplomatic influence that simply couldn't have emerged through traditional alliance structures. She noted that 17 civilizations had formally requested similar adoption-style alliances, signaling a galaxy-wide redefinition of how species conceptualize belonging. These weren't just diplomatic inquiries. They were applications for relationships based on the human Zapiran model of emotional bonding and mutual protection. The assessment highlighted how pack loyalty protocols were systematically replacing standard diplomatic conventions across multiple sectors, creating new interstellar relationship templates that prioritized trust over verification. Humanity hadn't just gained an ally in the traditional sense, they'd acquired a genuine partner civilization that enhanced both species' capabilities beyond simple addition. The technological exchange had produced breakthroughs neither could have achieved alone. The cultural integration had created new art forms and scientific approaches, and the military cooperation had developed tactical innovations that were already being studied across 5 sectors. The relationship operated as a multiplicative factor rather than a simple alliance. The economic benefits alone outweighed the military costs by several orders of magnitude, but the assessment wisely avoided reducing the relationship to financial terms. The cultural and scientific advancements represented value that couldn't be quantified on balance sheets, while the diplomatic influence generated through demonstrated loyalty created negotiating leverage that traditional power projection couldn't match. The model proved remarkably scalable across multiple species with different capabilities and needs, suggesting this wasn't a unique case but a reproducible relationship. Framework Ambassador Reynolds assessed the alliance as successful because genuine partnership created multiplicative benefits beyond anything transactional relationships could achieve. The report emphasized that the deepest advantages emerged from the emotional foundation of the relationship, rather than its formal structures. Trust enabled risk-taking, which produced innovation, which reinforced trust, creating a positive feedback loop that conventional alliances struggled to replicate. Which brings us back to how the children who started it all grew into their roles. The assessment included a forward-looking section that considered how the relationship would evolve as both species matured together, noting that the foundation established through Timothy's initial friendship and subsequent events had created patterns that would likely persist for generations: the human capacity for protection and the Zapiran capacity for harmonic communication had proven complementary in ways that suggested long-term stability. The report concluded that the most significant outcome wasn't measured in technology or territory, but in the establishment of a new interstellar relationship paradigm based on voluntary emotional commitment rather than negotiated terms. This model offered solutions to problems that had plagued galactic diplomacy for centuries, including the enforcement of agreements and the maintenance of long-term cooperation between unequal partners. The human-Zapiran relationship demonstrated that strength could protect without dominating, and vulnerability could accept protection without surrendering autonomy. Then again, the assessment also noted that such relationships require continuous maintenance and mutual respect to remain healthy. The autonomy debate and its resolution through the Song of Chosen Family served as a case study in how to navigate the inevitable tensions that arise in deep partnerships. The report suggested that this ability to work through conflicts while maintaining fundamental trust might be the relationship's most valuable export to other civilizations. Look, the kids who start revolutions usually don't get to see them grow up. At 16, Timothy Chen found himself serving as a junior cultural liaison between human and Zapiran institutions, a position that balanced genuine responsibility with symbolic importance in ways that would challenge someone twice his age. His unique role as both functional bridge and living symbol created opportunities that formal diplomats couldn't access, alongside pressures that would have broken most professionals. He operated in the space between childhood friendship and interstellar politics, leveraging his unique history while navigating the expectations that came with it. He worked directly with Clicky, who had become a planetary surveyor specializing in crystal formations that powered the very communication networks their friendship had helped create. Their childhood bond evolved into professional collaboration that made interspecies integration seem natural rather than extraordinary. When they appeared together at joint facilities or cultural events, they represented something more powerful than diplomatic agreements. They demonstrated that cross-species relationships could mature alongside the people in them, growing from simple friendship to complex partnership. Timothy's celebrity status, carefully managed by both human and Zapiran authorities, helped normalize what might otherwise have seemed like extraordinary circumstances. His presence at school exchanges, technology demonstrations, and cultural festivals made human-Zapiran collaboration appear routine rather than remarkable. He represented how child friendships could evolve into durable, intergenerational roles that served both species, without requiring special recognition or artificial positioning. His continued involvement ensured the alliance remembered its origins in personal connection rather than political calculation. When negotiations grew tense or misunderstandings arose, the simple fact that Timothy and Clicky still worked together served as a reminder of what had started everything. Their ongoing friendship provided tangible proof that the relationship wasn't just strategic. It was personal in ways that transcended diplomatic convenience or temporary advantage. Timothy serves as a cultural liaison because his unique position as the friendship's originator provides authentic connection that formal diplomacy cannot replicate. His value isn't in his technical knowledge or negotiation skills. It's in his genuine relationship with someone from another species that began before politics got involved. That authenticity makes him more effective at building trust than trained diplomats with decades of experience, because he operates from personal history rather than professional training. His work involves translating between species in ways that go beyond language, helping humans understand Zapiran cultural contexts, and Zapirans comprehend human emotional responses. He's particularly effective at identifying misunderstandings before they become conflicts, recognizing when cultural differences are creating friction that technical translations can't resolve. His insights come from years of navigating both cultures simultaneously, rather than studying them separately. The role isn't without its challenges. Being permanently associated with a historical event creates expectations that can limit personal development. Every action gets interpreted through the lens of his symbolic importance, and mistakes receive disproportionate attention. He's had to learn diplomacy faster than most professionals because his errors could have implications beyond individual relationships. Then again, sometimes the bridge becomes the destination. Timothy's identity has become so intertwined with the human-Zapiran relationship that separating his personal growth from interspecies politics may no longer be possible. What began as a childhood adventure has defined his life path in ways nobody could have predicted, turning accidental friendship into professional purpose. The boy who found a friend in the woods became the living connection between civilizations, and that connection shows no signs of weakening as both species continue to build their future together. The thing about paradigm shifts, they become the new normal. By year 5, the human-Zapiran alliance had matured into something far beyond a simple partnership, evolving into a scalable model that multiple civilizations were actively adopting and adapting to their own circumstances. What began as an emergency rescue operation had transformed into a template for interstellar relations that emphasized emotional bonds over negotiated terms, creating relationships that proved more durable and productive than traditional alliances. Other civilizations adopted variations of the guardianship protocol based on that emotional foundation, rather than careful treaty construction. 17 species had implemented relationship frameworks that mirrored the human approach, prioritizing trust building through action rather than contract negotiation. The galactic diplomatic community found itself grappling with a new relationship paradigm that their existing systems weren't designed to handle, creating both opportunities and challenges for interstellar governance. Joint colonies produced hybrid art and science that neither species could have achieved separately, demonstrating the multiplicative effects of genuine cultural integration. Research facilities on shared worlds developed technologies that blended biological, physical, and harmonic principles in ways that defied traditional scientific categorization. Artistic collaborations created entirely new forms of expression that communicated across species, boundaries without requiring translation or explanation. Zapiran crystal singing technology revolutionized communications across 17 civilizations, becoming the standard for interstellar communication within remarkably short time frames. The technology's efficiency advantages proved so significant that older systems were being phased out, despite the substantial infrastructure investments they represented. The harmonic networks created cleaner signal paths with lower energy requirements, making them both economically and functionally superior to previous methods. Their harmonic mathematics pushed physics forward in directions nobody had anticipated, solving problems that had puzzled researchers for generations. The mathematical frameworks developed through humans-Apiran collaboration provided new tools for understanding subspace mechanics, quantum entanglement, and dimensional theory. Academic institutions across multiple species began incorporating these mathematical approaches into their standard curricula, recognizing their utility across numerous scientific disciplines. The galaxy had fundamentally redefined how species relate to each other based on human examples, moving from cautious distance to engaged partnership as the preferred relationship model. Diplomatic protocols were being rewritten to account for emotional factors that previous generations of negotiators had deliberately excluded from consideration. The understanding that trust could be a more reliable foundation than verification was gaining acceptance across interstellar relations. What began as a rescue story became a model for interstellar relations across multiple civilizations, demonstrating that small actions could create large-scale change when motivated by genuine care rather than strategic calculation. The timeline from first contact to widespread adoption of the relationship model set records for how quickly new diplomatic paradigms can establish themselves when they prove their value through practical results rather than theoretical advantages. Protecting one alien child created a galaxy-wide paradigm shift by demonstrating that emotional bonds could form stronger foundations than negotiated treaties. The evidence accumulated over 5 years showed that relationships based on mutual care and protection produced better outcomes across economic, technological, and cultural dimensions than carefully constructed alliances based on reciprocal benefits and balanced obligations. Which brings us back to the fundamental miscalculation everyone made about humanity. The Galactic Council's initial assessment missed the core driver behind human behavior, because they were looking for strategic motives where only emotional ones existed. They expected calculation and found compassion, anticipated self-interest and discovered loyalty, prepared for conquest and encountered adoption. Their models weren't wrong about human capabilities. They were wrong about human priorities. And that misunderstanding created the conditions for the most significant shift in interstellar relations in centuries. You know how the Galactic Council missed one crucial variable? Their risk assessments ran thousands of simulations on military capability, economic ambition, and technological advancement. They analyzed our weapons systems, our resource consumption patterns, our research and development cycles. They created detailed profiles of our political structures, our historical conflicts, our cultural development trajectories. What they didn't analyze was our children's drawings of aliens, our science fiction literature, or our tendency to adopt stray animals. They completely failed to account for humanity's tendency to adopt vulnerable species as family. Their psychologists noted our pack bonding behaviors but classified them as planetary-scale phenomena rather than scalable characteristics. They saw we protected our own children but didn't extrapolate that we might protect other species' children with equal intensity. This emotional driver proved more powerful than any strategic or economic motivation when activated, creating responses that defied conventional cost-benefit analysis. The pack mentality that seemed like a weakness in their models became humanity's greatest diplomatic strength precisely because it was so unpredictable. Where other species followed calculated self-interest, humans followed emotional connections that frequently overrode logical considerations. Their attempts to categorize humanity kept failing because they measured the wrong metrics. They tracked ship movements and resource flows when they should have been monitoring friendship formations and protective gestures. Protection of the young scaled to interstellar proportions without losing its emotional core or intensity. The same instinct that makes a human risk their life for a stranger's child in a burning building makes them risk their civilization for an alien species they've adopted. The Council's models couldn't process relationships based on affection rather than transaction because their entire framework assumed rational actors pursuing measurable advantages. Their analysts kept looking for the strategic angle, the hidden advantage, the long-term calculation behind human actions. They spent years trying to reverse-engineer diplomatic gains from emotional decisions that had no strategic planning behind them. The assumption that every action served some larger agenda prevented them from recognizing that sometimes protection is just protection, and friendship is just friendship, regardless of species or scale. The Galactic Council's warning missed that humanity's unpredictability stems from emotional bonds that override calculated self-interest in protection scenarios. They prepared for merchants and warriors when they should have been preparing for parents and friends. Their contingency plans accounted for greed, ambition, and territorial expansion, but not for the simple desire to keep someone safe because they've become part of your extended family. But here's the final truth about human nature in the galactic context. Their greatest strength isn't in their weapons or technology. It's in their capacity to see family where others see only aliens. Their unpredictability comes from operating on emotional logic rather than strategic calculation, and that makes them both more dangerous and more valuable than any assessment could capture. The Council measured our capabilities but didn't understand our priorities, and that misunderstanding created the most significant diplomatic shift in centuries. The truth is, humanity didn't conquer the galaxy, we adopted it. Our greatest strength isn't weapons or technology, but our capacity to make family where others see only aliens. That 8-year-old's friendship rewrote the rules because humans scale their protective instincts to fit any situation, turning interstellar relations into something resembling a neighborhood watch, rather than a military alliance. Remember that the next time someone warns you about being too emotional, it might just rewrite interstellar politics faster than any fleet mobilization or treaty negotiation ever could.